Welcome to the Anime Talking Field, a place to discuss anime, sakuga, and otaku culture. I understand it now. The meaning of the 80 field. Welcome to this pilot episode of Anime Talking Field, Full-Frontal.moe's new podcast. Our crew will freely discuss topics surrounding anime, sakuga, and otaku culture. I will be joined by three formidable hosts, and for this first episode, we have decided to discuss our favorite anime TV series and anime movies as a kind of introduction. We will now introduce ourselves. Ian, would you mind to start?
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm at reset_shift on Twitter, and I'm one of the hosts of the Anime Research podcast, which has ended up being more of a review podcast than we intended. I've been a regular anime watcher for about 10 years, and I've been a bitter old man longer than that. So, there.
Hi there, I'm Far. You can find me on Twitter at FarFromMoney. I'm a Sakuga fan since 2014, and in late 2016 I started the first Italian Sakuga-oriented blog, which is called Far From Animation, and after that I continued kinda my experience with the Sakuga fandom in a lot of ways. I started translating stuff for animators. I taken part in artistunknown.info, which is a collective blog of sorts with other Sakuga fans. And right now I'm pretty much working as a translator for the manga market in Italy.
Hi, I'm the third host, Matteo. So I'm mainly known for, I think, being the admin and writer of the blog Animetude. I've been a Sakuga fan since, I'd say, 2017, but I've really gotten deep into it thanks to my blog and all the time I got thanks to the lockdown. So that was this winter and spring of 2020. So now I'm really deep into it, and especially retro anime and anime history.
So, hello everyone, I'm Dimitri. I'm the founder of Full-Frontal.moe, which has existed yet for 2 years. Before that, I've written for a few French blogs and also for the blog Wave Motion Canon. I've been an anime fan for quite most of my life, but I've really got invested in anime history and Sakuga from 2014 on. Basically, when I discovered Daikon, I just fell in love with animation and had wanted to write about it and discover more about it. That's where it all started. So, to start this first episode, which is an introductory episode, we'll just try to introduce ourselves, our taste for anime and what we like. We've each established a list of 3 favorite anime TV series, 3 anime movies, 3 staffs that we like, and 3 favorite Sakuga scenes. So we'll just go around them as a turntable and just discuss everyone's opinions about each and other's choices. So, Ian, if you'd like to introduce your first pick for favorite anime series.
Just edging out Serial Experiments Lane, just got to say that it was a contender, is the anime Girls in Panzer. And I think it's one of those anime that is more infamous than famous. It's the sports show where the girls ride around in tanks and fire at each other in those tanks. And it's very hard for people to take that premise seriously, but when you watch it, it's a very compelling show. I'm not quite sure what else I want to say about it.
Well, I think Girls and Panzer is an interesting pick because it's kind of representative of what modern otaku culture is. So, like, post 2000 otaku culture, it's like cute girls doing. So, it's cute girls and, and military stuff, which is two big aspects of otaku culture. So, it's not the kind of show that you could recommend to anyone, obviously. But at the same time, it takes many ways, and like it has some great animations. The movies are incredible. I really like the third movie, and it's got this appeal to anime fans. It's like in essence, it's not one of the first shows you'd watch or recommend to anyone getting into anime, but once you're with your friends who also have developed some taste, then you can just enjoy it all together. And I love Girls and Panzer T.
Yeah, but it's really interesting that you chose it over Serial Experiments Lane, which sounds like this very deep, very experimental show that most otaku wouldn't really maybe like. At least most weebs wouldn't go to, and instead you take Girls and Panzer, which is really the cute girls doing cute things.
Yeah, the
are
kind of
so cute.
polar opposites.
I think that this is a theme in my taste is that I like cute girls doing cute things. So like just whatever is weird. I think that a lot about my anime taste can be explained by how early on in my anime development I watched Excel Saga. I think it says a lot about me that was one of the earliest shows I watched.
So my first pick was Sangatsu no Lion, which is I think the only relatively recent thing I've picked, which shows where my priorities are. But I think it's pretty much in my taste. So everything is going to be very similar to this in that it's a very slice of life kind of show with a lot of introspection, psychology, drama, and especially what I think is really important is the fact that it has a very strong presentation that is a very obvious style with like a direction that you really spot. You know there's someone behind the camera, so to speak, and the animation is also very noticeable, very flashy in a way, especially in the opening scene of the first episode where you see Rei all in black and white and with very impressive sound effects and things like that. So I mean, I love Sangatsu a lot, but I think a reason why I picked it's because it's very indicative of my tastes in general.
So is this in like the typical Shaft style, or is it an outlier in the Shaft canon? Because I haven't seen this one.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty much the Shaft style, but I mean, it depends what you mean because it's not as obvious as Monogatari shows, for example, because there are less people bending their heads and things like that. But yeah, there's the same kind of editing and attention to shot composition and this kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say it's in the Shaft style, which I love. So
yeah, I think Shaft was a gateway for a lot of people. I think it's fair to say it was definitely a gateway for me into paying more attention to the stylistic and compositional aspects of animation.
Yeah, the Monogatari series direction is it's very cinematographic in a sense, and rather than just focusing on animation alone, what's interesting in it is obviously all the shot composition and the editing, which often in Sakuga discourses tends to be forgotten.
Because I think it's difficult for Sakuga fans to apprehend editing. Maybe we'll talk about it a bit more in depth later. But since editing can break the flow of a scene or a movement, I think for Sakuga fans who tend to look at the movement of objects or characters in a single shot, editing can be a bit difficult to talk about. So the shaft shows tend to be very different in that way. And like big shafts animators know how to play with editing, so that's what makes them interesting in a way.
Absolutely.
I quite agree on that, especially because if you think about it, Sakuga fans talk especially about cats, and the idea itself of a cat is quite like an adversary of the idea of editing itself, because you work on what you can see and what you can especially what you can find in a very very small structure. But when it comes to editing, you are also working on what you cannot see and what is in a very bigger picture of the whole scene. So I think that kind of clashes with what Sakuga is right now, at least when it comes to Sakuga as a methodology.
Yeah, that's very right, especially since the cut is the sequence between two editing. One cut is one sequence in the Econte. So the fact only that people talk about cuts makes it so that you cannot talk about the editing, because a single cut has no editing. I mean, it's what is between what is edited. So, and also most of the time, some people, they talk about cuts when it's actually a sequence, because it would be it happens that people talk about cuts when it's multiple cuts together. But basically, if you focus on the cut, and then you cannot focus on the editing, obviously.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of frustrate me with the fact that we are saying a cut. I know if you're on Twitter, it's shorter than sequence, but cut is a really vague term. English can be pretty vague.
It's not vague. I think it's just misused, because people hear cut, and so they assume what a cut is. But the thing, a cut in animation is pretty well defined. It's basically one sequence in the Econte. You have the number of cuts, the number of basically moments where the sequence change. You have a camera. Basically, you have a how do I put it?
Is the transition from one shot to the other?
Yeah, exactly.
Like in live action, and yeah, we should be clear about that. That a shot is not a cut, because the cut is the transition from one shot to the other. But instead, we say cut either to speak about a shot or a sequence, and that's.
I think it also comes from the fact that cut is a shot that you hear much more in anime than shot, because animators work on cuts, not on shots.
Yeah.
Coming back to the subject of Sangatsu no Lion, I actually have some things to say about it. I sadly didn't watch the anime, only a few episodes. It was a time where I actually kind of stopped watching anime, but I read the manga, which I quite liked, and it got me into shogi. And I have a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, very close friend, Yukio Takatsu, who worked on one of the endings of the show, I think the third one. It's a very beautiful one with a lot of morphing scenes, obake style as they call it. And if you haven't seen it, it's a very very beautiful piece. I really love his work, and especially on this ending, he actually tried to work on a few new techniques, because he just started picking up work on iPad Pro at that time with Procreate. So he actually tried out a few new things with it, and you can see the evolution of the style. He then worked on a short film for it's a commercial made by Shaft for the Ikebukuro district in Tokyo. There's a little advertisement for the district in made by Shaft, which was done, I guess, 2 years ago, maybe, which Yukio Takatsu directed, and also very beautiful segment, which I would recommend checking out.
So I'm looking at his work on the Boru right now, and first we must acknowledge him because he's the one who animated the Platinum Disco clip.
Yukio has been working. Yukio has basically done, I guess, every or next to every opening for the Monogatari series ever since Nisei Monogatari. He was called by Shimbo. He doesn't remember if it was the Shaft's director Shimbo who called him, but he was called by Shaft to work on the openings, and they just liked his work. I suspect, I don't have a confirmation, but I suspect that Yukio, he used before that to make a lot of opening animations for video games. He did, for example, Persona 3, the opening for Persona 3. And I know that Shimbo, he really likes video games. And I suspect that Shimbo might have liked Yukio's work from what I've seen playing and wanted him to work on Nisei Monogatari because of that. I can't affirm that. I can't be sure. I'll ask Shimbo when I meet him, obviously, one day, hopefully. But it's what I suspect.
But to come back to Sengatsu, indeed, his ending it's got a very watercolor painting style, and it's pretty cool. Sengatsu's endings and openings are all pretty good, but it's true that this one is nice. So check it out.
So about my first pick, it would be Hisone Tomasa-tan, the Dragon Pilot. It's an anime that came out in 2018, directed by Shinji Iguchi. And I think you'll see a trend within most of my picks. They all more or less turn around people from Gainax and people who worked on Evangelion. So Dragon Pilot was actually a pretty good surprise for me. It's at a time where I had stopped watching anime for a while, so I was just getting back into it. In 2018, I think I watched also Darling in the Franxx. I wasn't watching a lot of things. And when it started airing, some of my friends told me, you need to check it out, it's really great. So I picked it up then, and it was a big surprise. I loved it. Animation and designs are great. You have Shigeto Koyama, who did the designs for the dragons. All the mechanical parts were done by Kawamori, and the transformations look great. It's not only is it a great looking anime, but the story was quite compelling too. It's you have all these characters like realizing something about themselves, and it was a nice change. I mean, I would like more projects like Hisomaso to come out because first of all, I love original anime. Today you see a lot of adaptations, and I prefer original anime projects, especially if they well done with a nice team. And I mean, Hisomaso, it's basically a monster team working on an amazing project that comes out of nowhere and with a great result.
Yeah, I haven't seen Hisomaso. I have seen some clips on the Boru, and when it came out, people talking about it. It's true. It's got a pretty nice aesthetic with these very round, cute characters.
I love how his designs. In the end, it's a bit like Girls and Panzer. You have cute girls, which are not just cute girls. I mean, and cute dragons. I mean, you have all this cute and kind of more aesthetic and action. And at many points in the show, like the show tries the characters don't behave in a particularly cute way. Like you have one of the characters, he starts smoking. You wouldn't expect a character like that to pick up smoking. And
okay.
Like, to me, Zomazo is, especially when we talk about Aoki's designs, in general, about Aoki's works, really, they're kawaii, but they're not moe, in a sense,
True.
Yeah.
They're very cute, but they aren't really bishoujo characters. Maybe some of them. like
In some of his expositions, maybe, but indeed not for Hisama. So I agree.
for example, like Eri has kind of the uh, uh, some characteristics that you can associate with the tsundere archetype, for example, but she isn't really a tsundere, and no one of the main girls are really uh, related to some otaku culture tropes, which to me is kind of interesting because they still work very well in that same cultural context.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I guess that's what makes also the show kind of peculiar, is that it has a lot of otaku elements, obviously, but at the same time, the show itself doesn't appear to be an otaku work, and it kind of floats around that line.
Yeah, to me, maybe it's quite like an encompassing way of taking various elements typical of otaku, but they're not really necessarily uh, main points of otaku culture per se, or, or better, uh, today's otaku culture per se, but they kind of work together as a artistic product in a sense. Like you can see elements from the designs that are quite appreciable for people who like mecha designs, or they like in general vehicles, and at the same time they aren't really what you would expect from a mecha design work, or from a anime related to planes, for example.
Yeah, totally. I mean, basically, it's the kind of show which will appeal to otakus because you have this militaristic element, you have airplanes, you have mechas, you have girls, but at the same time, the way it treats them, the way it treats them, it doesn't treat them as an otaku product.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree on. I can go with my pick now.
yeah,
Okay, I choose Gundam 0080 War in a Pocket because, in a sense, it encompasses everything I highly value in a anime series in order to make them a very, very excellent series. Since the first moment, you can see how, for example, the animation kinda reaches a point to uh, make to enrich the general narrative, which per se is already compelling enough, but with all the character motion, the realistic effect of the mecha fights, you can go and feel even more intensely what the character are really thinking about what they're experiencing in that specific moment. But also, it kind of have this meta text about what Gundam was at the time, because it was already a big franchise with a lot of contradiction in itself. For example, it kind of picked up the discourse about while Gundam is a series that talk about all the horrific things people do during war. At the time, it was already a big franchise who essentially lived off model kits, small toys, and stuff like that, even for adults and not really only for children. And while this part is mostly some intellectual subtext you can see in the more in the screenplay, really, and not really in the storyboarding choices and the animation choices. You have with that specific series, in comparison with all the other Gundam OV series of the time, a more in-depth look about what otaku culture at the time looked like, and what was kind of contradictory. And I personally like those kind of things when they can come up in Japanese media, because it's not really something really anime per se. I actually suspect that, especially in this period of time, more than in older decades, anime is becoming more and more static in the sense of the various reasoning the various stuff can do about what they have around them in a more intellectual way. While I can see a lot of interesting discourses about very specific things, like, for example, how the urban planning is evolving in the various cities of Japan. And that's something that, for example, I will probably talk about later when I'll go to Yamano Susume. When it comes to stuff this controversial, like the role of war in Gundam, for example, there isn't really that much to feed about in the newer series. So this is another aspect I really like.
Yeah, my relationship with double 80 is pretty complicated because it's actually one of these series that I know is objectively good, but which I can't get to like because I just can't care about what's going on. But I recognize that it does interesting things, which you really put in a really interesting way.
Yeah, Matto is just a psychopath.
No,
How can you not care about it?
I don't know.
more than more like a Tomino fan to me.
Yeah, a bit of that.
I think that most people here probably like Gundam First, the 0079. To me, First Gundam is an intemporal, and it's an intemporal story. Like, even 200 years from now, if humanity still survives, like, it will be a story that still will touch people's hearts. And at the same time, for 0080, not only are the visuals very compelling, the Mitsui so interesting is incredible. The Hygok fight, it just looks awesome. But the story, it's one of the most interesting approaches to Gundam in the whole franchise. So yeah.
Yeah, one of my friends describes this as War in the Pocket as his favorite Gundam, and I think his words to me were it's the perfect singular encapsulation of Gundam and its anti-war themes as a whole.
Yeah, but most often it's people's favorite Gundam. Like, most of people I know who love Gundam, they have War in the Pocket as their favorite Gundam, or second favorite next to Unicorn.
Yeah, those two seem to be the top.
To me, more than an anti-war series, like maybe 0079 can be, it is more like look at what there is behind the representation aspect in Gundam. In the sense of when you, for example, watching the original Gundam, you see the various for example, Zeon Soldier that gets lined by the Gundam. You don't really think too much about them.
Yeah, you don't really care about it. Yeah,
Care only about the main characters. And while you can see the PTSD that the various characters have by their very traumatic action they have to do in various moments of the series, you still don't understand that much the kind of very, very tragic thing that's happening on screen. Because that's kind of like how media works in a sense. You can't care about the characters if you don't know them really well. So I think that in this meta aspect in 0080, it's more like something like look what there is actually behind the series in a by giving the focus on a single essential couple of characters, which you start to understand a little bit better, but you already know that they're not really important and they can probably experience really, really bad things by the end.
Yeah, totally, and that's why I think it's really good. Anyway, but I know that the reason I like Gundam is to be fucked over by. So, despite all its qualities, I just can't like it. But you're completely right. It's really interesting and very rich in many ways, and that's why it deserves to be considered as one of the best Gundams, even though personally I don't really like it.
I mean, that's fine.
So no one will hold you accountable for it. Yeah.
No, all the Gundam fandom will, and they will try to kill me after we record this, but it's all right.
Yeah, it's good that we talked about Gundam at least once, like having our favorite series, because it's been such a staple of our culture forever.
Could we talk about our favorite anime without mentioning Gundam once? The problem is, since we only have 3 picks, it was actually kind of hard to have everything fit, and yeah.
True.
So, but obviously, Gundam to me, the first Gundam, it has a special place in my heart. Like, it's really one of the greatest story ever told for me.
Okay, let's move on to the second one.
So yeah, we can go to the second picks.
Okay, yeah. So from one of the agriculture to another, and Super Sentai shows. Now we're going to be talking about anime rather than Super Sentai, but my next pick is Samurai Flamenco, which is about a person who aspires to be one of these heroes that he saw on TV and works towards it, and the world just gets crazier, and he achieves this goal despite it not making any sense. It's hard to explain my show if you never really got into those sorts of hero shows, because it's just a love letter to it. It's just it's like being a kid again, right? And I think the thing that really sells it for me is Kurota. I think I can credit Kurota his writing on this series, because I don't like talking about pacing because I think it's cheap. I think people talk about pacing when they can't talk about anything else. But the level of escalation in this show, from getting beat up by kids in a park to saving the world, happens very naturally, and it always pushes when you feel comfortable. And I think that a lot of shows could learn from it. Has anybody else actually seen the show?
Yeah, I've never watched it. I've got it recommended to me a few times by friends. I've never taken the time to watch it, so I sadly don't have anything to say about it.
I quite liked it when I watched it. I don't know if I can say that's one of my favorite, but I really appreciate the courage it has sometimes to go a bit over what you would expect to an anime, in a sense that some situations that are really fun and entertaining are at the same time really absurd for a late night anime show that targeted to, I guess, adults in a sense. But overall, I really thought that those very strange portion, for example, the everyone is flamenco one, it's they have their quite unique taste in a sense. They have their unique flavor.
I think for me, one of my favorite episodes in this is the second episode, or I want to say it's the second episode. It might be the third episode, where he's just spends about 5 minutes chasing down someone because they stole an umbrella, and it's not, and it's wrong to steal umbrellas, and he becomes like an internet sensation as a result of it.
I don't know this show, but the way you talk about it, it sounds like a good version, a well-written version of One Punch Man. Is that correct?
Well, One Punch Man is well written too. What you're talking about?
I think they appeal to the same sort of people, but it certainly never had the level of popularity that One Punch Man did. I think
Yeah.
I think the One Punch Man was an easier sell for a lot of people. I think particularly because it escalates so much and so frequently that what you're starting off with is nothing like what it ends at. Actually, I don't think anyone sees the ending coming. Like there's a part I think it's about episode 8 where it changes and like it has changed because they start introducing people like Guillotine Gorilla and King Torture, and it's a show that doesn't make any sense, but I love it very, very much.
Actually, what I think is interesting is that it came out around 2012, right? If I'm not mistaken.
2013.
2013. 2013. So I think the show did not have much popularity because often you see people talk about it, but it's not a great sensation. And I think it came out too early because today you have really a big boom of superhero stories. You have especially if you look at manga, not only anime, but anime, but especially manga, you have a lot of superhero stories. And you have One Punch Man, which came out. You have Hiraka, and then you have all sorts of other hero stories also, which are booming in Japan. And I guess maybe Samurai Flamenco, it came out a bit too early to have actually an impact in the West. I guess if it had come out like 1 or 2 years ago, much more people would have been interested in it.
I agree.
Yeah, but can we really compare Super Sentai with superheroes? This is the big question to me.
Well, it's to have a comparison. There's this new Ultraman manga, which is done by the duo which made Cannon Buster. No, not Cannon Buster.
Which is the one to be animated, I think.
Yeah, exactly. The one which is, I think it came out, the Netflix series in 3D. Yeah, the manga is quite better though. The manga is really good. I don't read a lot of manga, but that's one of the few I've picked up, and I love the way the action is portrayed in it, and because they use the technique they use. It's really interesting the way they draw the lines and all, and the composition of the pages. And the thing is, why did they do this new Ultraman, which more resembles an Iron Man than an Ultraman? They wanted to cater they wanted to sell Ultraman to the American audiences, to Western audiences, and they wanted to use the fact that Avengers, superheroes are very popular right now to try to sell it. So that's why it got this reboot. Yeah. And Super Sentai, it's a Japanese type of superhero. So I guess that's because of the boom of superheroes, it could have been sold better, pitched better to the people. It's like a bit in comparison. It's a show which also it got overshadowed by One Punch Man because the two animes came out at the same time. It's Concrete Revolution, Conrevo. It's one of my favorite anime. I like it a lot. It's basically a Japanese Watchmen. It's got a very similar storyline to Watchmen, and you have every Japanese superhero archetype. The hero is basically the cyborg from Cyborg 009. You have a super robot which makes a gattai between 5 people. You've got a Kamen Rider double. You've got a Maho Shoujo. So it's basically Watchmen but with Japanese archetypes, and it's really great. Not only does it look sick, but the story is pretty well written, and basically it came out at the same time as One Punch Man, and so basically, except of Sakuga Nerd, who talked about the latest season because of Yutaka Nakamura, nobody talked about Conrevo.
I agree that there was this kind of revival of like older Japanese archetypes of heroes in a more modern way, but to me it was not only because this is the time of heroes in a sense. It was also because to me the younger Japanese generation aren't really that familiar with those kind of tropes, those kind of archetypes, and maybe they kinda use it more Americanized version of them to introduce some franchises in that specific demographic.
Oh yeah, that's totally possible. I mean, the thing is, today superheroes are in. You just have to see how much Avengers is making in the theaters, not only here in the West but also in Japan. Like people today.
Wanted to talk about, because even if in Japan American comics aren't really popular and most of them struggle to find proper publications, when it comes to superhero movies, they're quite they sell quite good, like in every other country. I think there isn't this big discrepancy between the West and Japan in this sense.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so my second pick is Nichijou, which is how can I describe Nichijou? I mean, it's
There's a goat in the class.
So basically, it's one of the greatest things ever animated, to put it in simple words. But it's an awesome comedy, and really, I've watched it like 4 times. I know all the gags by heart, and it still makes me laugh. I mean, I don't know how this is possible. But what I really like about Nichijou is that it's not just this really absurd, well-animated comedy. It's so, how can I say this, warm-hearted and full of love and humanity and tenderness for all of its characters. Like, it's one of the few shows that actually made me cry, not only with laughter, but also because the end is so touching. When basically by the end, because of a quid pro quo, one of the main girls, Mio, thinks she's been rejected by the senpai she loves, and all her friends are around her, and they support her and help her to get through this. And it's just so beautiful and so cute that it's so much more than the absurd comedy, which it is, but it's also among the Kyoani shows, one of the best, because it is also a Kyoani show with everything that makes them so special. So the school setting, the focus on the school, on the interpersonal relationships, and this kind of thing. So I cannot express enough my love for Nichijou.
I'm not sure if this is fair, but I think of it as the modern Azumanga Daioh.
Yeah, kinda. But it has its own perks, which Azumanga Daioh doesn't have.
Yeah, I agree. Especially on more the technical side, the Azumanga Daioh gags are very funny sometimes, but they're quite static. I kinda remember some interesting scenes, like for example the Hiro Kishida one in the pool, which is super good. But when it comes to Nichijou, how the animation is used to portray the actual jokes is totally on another level.
Yeah, but I totally see the link between the two, because
it's the same kind of humor. It's a very similar humor, but indeed Nichijou, the way it portrays it, it's got a much heavier use of the visual. The visuals, they help the gags match more. I completely agree, and that's what makes also Nichijou so memorable to so many people who watched it. Also, the visuals are practically over the top all the time, like, because, for example, one thing is to have a fight against the goat, but that's the way it was directed, the way it was all set up, is what really sells it. Like, it really goes over the top to sell it to you, and that's what I find amazing with it.
I remember that Japanese fan wrote an entire article about the fight against the goat, talking about all the other Kigami wrestling scene that he animated, and then after he directed. like even for something that kind of seems simple and just that's just good animation, that's just a quality improvement over your average gag anime series, there is something very steady and strong behind that kind of compositions.
Yeah, it's kind of a meme to say that, but with these absurd fight scenes, Nichijou does better fight animation than like 80% of big shonen shows. So it's pretty amazing, and it's not even a fighting show.
Yeah, that's something that I think Kyoani can mimic a bit very, very well, even in newer works. For example, I remember the volleyball scene in My Dragon, which kind of reminded me of a lot of the Nichijou scenes, and they can capture in a very, very intelligent manner to me a lot of visual tropes that are popular in other more serious anime for kids and adolescents.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting about them because while they're known for this very realistic style with Yoka and K-On and Euphonium and things like that, they're also able to like go completely crazy in shows like Nichijou or some sequences in Maid Dragon. And it's not like they can't do it. It's just if they do it, they'll do it better than anyone else. But if they don't want to do it, they just don't. And it's pretty amazing.
My second pick is Science Saru's Ping Pong's Animation, directed by Masaaki Yuasa. So I guess Yuasa is a pretty well-known director now. He's probably one of the most talked about anime directors in the West because of Devilman Crybaby and Eizouken. But Ping Pong is a show which has touched me a lot on a personal level. Like the whole story of Peko, it's a character which reminds me a lot of myself. The way he falls at rock bottom and motivates himself to get back at the top. And there's so many strong emotional moments, aside of the fact that the show just looks spectacular. I love the way the way Yuasa appropriated himself the work of Taiyo Matsumoto. He uses a lot of split screen, which reminds a lot of the manga panels. You have some supreme scenes by Ohira and other masterful animators. In the first episode, when China and Smile, when China and Peko have the first ping pong match, like basically every point that China makes against Peko, it was just to show off every different ping pong shot that you could make, which makes it totally incredible. And yeah, it's just a show which has left a big, huge impression on me. It has kind of not changed me as a person, but made me realize stuff on a personal level, which is why it has a very special place in my heart, and I consider it one of my favorite anime.
Sorry to be that guy, but Ping Pong wasn't produced by Science Saru. I don't know.
Oh, really?
I don't know if it existed at the time, but checking it, it was by Tatsunoko. I thought it was Madhouse, but actually it was Tatsunoko. So
it was a co-production between the early Science Saru, which wasn't a real studio at the time, and Tatsunoko. Tatsunoko did most of the animation production, but Science Saru, in a sense, was credited alongside Tatsunoko. It was kind of similar to the Darling in the Franxx situation in a sense. You have a big studio who does most of the difficult part, but you have still to integrate the other one because it's still a bit essential in the overall production.
Okay, because I was quite sure that it was Science Saru because it has the particular working method on it. So that's why I thought about it because obviously Yuasa is a pretty particular director since he has worked for a few years with the French studio Ankama, which had an animation studio in Japan, and there he picked up a working method which they had found to reduce animation production costs, which was to use Flash, the the Adobe Flash program, to make some part of the animation using reusable clips and basically finding new ways of having limited animation and then still using traditional Genga methods for like for the flashy scenes. But this is how today USA is able to produce a film like Lou with only 18 key animators, is because he was able to pick up some of the most important stuff from Ankama, the two best Flash animators, and bring them with him. So I was quite certain that Ping Pong was the birth of Science Saru, but
it's true in a sense. It's not the first full Science Saru animation product per se, but Science Saru is credited as one of the producer of the show.
It was you kept mentioning Flash because in 2020, Flash is like a dirty word because of just how bad like 99% of it is, and that's true of everything. But when it's all over the internet, like it was, I think even people who didn't know very much about the programs that get used in animation were very soured on.
Oh yeah, obviously. But the funny story is why USNI now works with Flash and why Ankama did, because basically Ankama is this big French video game producer. They made the most popular French MMORPG, which is called Dofus. And they started out basically as a company doing web design with Flash. And they then started to do the game, and basically all the company only used to work with Flash. It was their thing. And so when they decided to make an anime series about the game, it's the only thing they knew how to use, and they found a method to use it to reduce production costs. It's something I would like to write about on Full Frontal because it helps understanding how USA produces his works now. And I should have some collections, archives of the making of the anime series on how the particular methods they used to facilitate the production of anime through Flash. Basically, I remember they had multiple. They were doing basically what you would do with audio clips, a principle similar to using audio clips, but for animation. And so they would draw faces, expressions one time and use them all around 2 seasons, like 50 episodes, and didn't have to draw them again.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Yuasa did the special episode of WAFku.
Yeah, he worked with them for several years. He did the special episodes, but he also helped out on other aspects of production for the TV series. When was it? It was in 2017. I had a long discussion with Christophe Bultil, which is one of the main actors of the Ankama Japan project. And so we had a long talk about the production processes and the involvement of USA in the production of the animes and all. So Anyang Choi and USA, they especially made the special episode, but they also contributed a lot on the TV series.
That's especially the more production side of the work. That's something that isn't really talked about when it comes to WAFku. WAFku, I think, even in Italy, but in the West in general, it's kind of a pretty well-known series by now. But I don't think that people really knows this big link there is between Science Saru and Ankama.
I've never seen it talked about on the English internet. Here in France, here in France, it's quite well known for I mean, Sakuga fans, big anime fans, they usually know it because obviously, like Wakfu is our thing. It was produced here, but I guess that in the West, I haven't seen any resources talking about it, and so that's why I really wanted to make a multiple article series of the history of French and Japanese collaboration, because there's a lot to talk about, be it Thomas Romain, Eddie Meong, who actually worked also at Ankama. He went to Japan working as a staff for Ankama Japan at some time, and there's a really huge history of co-productions between France and Japan, which have contributed actually a lot to what anime in Japan is today, because you see the influence of Thomas Romain at Satellite, who brought a lot of French people in the industry. You see exactly all this history of USR, because basically what made USR then pick up this method is he saw how efficient it was, and when the Ankama Japan project was shut off, some of the animators, of the French animators, they went back to France working for Ankama, but USR basically, he was able to pick up two of the best animators. I know one is Abel, and
Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. The two are Spanish. The or at least Spanish or Latino. That I'm certain. And basically, they came to work with Yuasa, and you see them often credited. He has 2 or 4 animators credited for flash animation, and they're always in his works. And that's how he's able to cut off the work of Gangaman and have like such an important release schedule, like when he released both Lou and the Walk Along Girl movie, and then he had also another TV show in the works. Like it was crazy. Well, like how can he? Yeah, he had a Devilman Crybaby obviously also in the works, and we're like, how can he put up with such a schedule? And that's why, actually, that's because he doesn't need many animators. Like, if I remember correctly, we counted the number of key animators on Lulu, and it was like 18 animators, which for a movie, for a feature-length movie, is completely crazy. And that's how they do it.
And of course, it's not just like how much he's doing, but the consistent level of quality across.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, even if some people will argue that Devilman Crybaby look bad, and those people, they obviously have some art appreciation problem in my sense. Maybe I'm sounding too harsh, but it's got its style, and it's mainly impacted by the fact that they use Flash.
While Devilman Crybaby maybe doesn't have this kind of problems, to me it's quite arguable that some animators, for example, I think of Oira in Lu, they kinda get crippled a bit by that specific workflow, in a sense. So I can understand where they're coming from when they say that kinda looks bad.
Yeah, for me, the main reason why Ping Pong can't be a Science Saru show is because almost everything Yuasa has done in Science Saru is bad, and Ping Pong isn't bad.
Stop it. No, Devilman Crybaby is pretty alright. It's not great to me because I love the Devilman manga. It's one of my favorite manga. To me, it's like quite perfect, and I don't like some changes he made, and I didn't have the same feeling watching the anime as I had reading Guy's manga. But Devilman Crybaby is pretty alright. It's really well done.
Yeah, it's not bad, but I think the only thing he's made in Sansaru that's at the level of his earlier works is the 90 Short Walk on Girl, which is completely batshit crazy. And
yeah, it's amazing.
The others are sometimes good, except the Japan Sinks, but we don't need to talk about that. They're kind of good, but they're just not as good as what he did before, which is why I kind of resent it. The use of Flash.
It's true that if you look at it, what USA does today is very different than what he used to, especially since, like, I remember Far sharing a post on Facebook sometime of it was an Italian page saying that USA was a rising star, And I was like, how can he be a rising star? He's done Mind Game in 2001, which has propulsed him in front of the headlights. Like, no, he's a shooting star right now. But yeah, Mind Game is probably his best work, honestly. Mind Game is amazing. He was free to do whatever he wanted, and he made such a unique and compelling work with Mind Game. And it's true that, and the thing is, he actually continued. Maybe today, one problem we have is, one, his style changed a bit and it appeals better to mainstream audiences. It's a bit more streamlined. So, and at the same time, also, maybe it got a bit stale for us, like who have known him for so many years, have seen all of his work, even his Shinchan works. And we're like, yeah, but it's not as appealing as it used to be, because it's not as special anymore. Now it's diluted in all of what he already did. So yeah, I guess I understand where you're going.
You heard it here. You can have too much of a good thing.
But I mean, after 15 years doing the extreme experimentation, one after another, one wants maybe something different. Like it's all the directors like Shinkai or Osoda and said, I want to be like them. I don't want to be anymore the experimental guy.
Yeah,
Shinkai used to be pretty experimental too, actually. I mean, if you watch his first movie, all done by himself, that's pretty dope shit.
I mean, yeah, but it's not what it's not what is.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
I definitely feel that about 10 years ago, if you were paying attention to Shinkai, you probably thought he was maybe not quote unquote the next Miyazaki, but he was kind of hot shit at the time. And I don't want to just completely shit over his two most recent films, but I think he's done the same thing where he's like, well, I've done all this, I've experimented as much as I really feel comfortable with. I kind of know what I want to do now to make money.
I don't agree too much. Like, I honestly very like, I like the two last Shinkais a lot, especially Tenkinoko. And I don't agree that he stopped doing what he's liked. Obviously, his style has changed because he's now collaborating with other people, and he's trying to appeal to some more mainstream audiences, where his works before, they were much more personal. But even though now his anime movies are basically blockbuster movies, it still keeps this little touch of himself. Like, he'll still have you watch all his pretty like his little kinks that he has, like the scene with the sake making in Your Name. Like, he still wants you to have his peculiar attentions to stuff he likes, and his little fetishes and all. So even if it has taken out a lot of his personal essence compared to his earlier movies, I still think that they're not as bad as many people tend to say they are. And I actually quite like the fact that he was able to appeal to mainstream audiences while still keeping a bit of the soul of what makes his work his work.
Like, it's a little bit hipsterism on my part. I think I'm willing to admit that. I definitely was excited as anyone else was with Your Name. I think it was when I saw Weathering with You that I was like, something's changed and I don't like it.
Yeah, me too. When I watched Weathering with You, I just hated it, and then I turned back towards all the rest of his movies, and I said, okay, I must hate this too, because it's the same person, and I hate Weathering with You so much that
But I don't know why you hate it. I loved it. I was afraid at first that he would do exactly the same thing as Kimi no Na wa. It would be too similar, and I mean, some people will say it's the same thing over again, but I think it has enough differences. I don't know. For me, it's stuck with me.
he didn't do Your Name too. That's something he didn't do, and really we have to acknowledge that he didn't do another Your Name, and And that's pretty impressive in a way, because your name was so overwhelming that it would have been very easy for him to redo it all over again, but he didn't. So in a way, that's pretty cool.
Because the thing is, he still wants to progress as a director. He hasn't told, like, he's not like, okay, I finally reached the peak of my art. No, he just realized that, okay, now is the starting. I'm now on the starting blocks. I've got recognition. Now I can do whatever I like to do, and I still have to improve on many ways. When you read his interviews, he did after Your Name, that's one focus point of what he was saying, is that I'm still not good at comedic writing. I've started including it in Your Name. I was helped by my producer, and he knows he's got a lot more to work about. Like, he's still a charcoal which needs to be refined into a fine diamond. He's not reached the peak of his art yet, and he knows that. He knows that. So that's why I don't think we need to be afraid that he'll do the same movie over and over again, because he knows that he's got many more things he wants to do. Basically, there's many more things he knows he has to improve on.
It's more like he reached the bottom and he can only go up from there.
Shut up.
Yeah, I think we've said enough about Shinkai, considering that, like,
Yeah, especially considering that nobody had picked anything by Shinkai.
well, I mean, he hasn't really done series work. So
Yeah, but we could have picked one of his movies.
I mean, I think that even in the older works, to me, there are some of them that maybe I can put them in a top 20 or 30 anime movies that I like. For example, 5 centimeters per second.
Mm.
But when it comes to him as an author, as a director per se, seeing everything that changed from there to today, it's quite, to me, difficult to say, oh, okay, Shinkai is one of my favorite directors, because even if his stories are still pretty much about essentially they're pretty much or small sentimental segments or boy met girl stories, they quite changed so much that I think they will definitely change it again in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but the thing is, I wouldn't pick Shinkai as anywhere near one of my favorite directors, but it's one I'm most hopeful on. First of all, because the spotlight's are on him. Like, everybody's looking at Shinkai now because he's got one of the highest grossing anime movies of these last years. He's super successful, so everybody's looking at him. Toho has a very close relationship to him, and so he's able to fully express himself artistically. So even though he's far from being one of my favorite directors or so, I like his works and I like to see where he's going. I'm very interested in seeing what's he gonna do next. So yeah, that's mostly it.
I think that maybe I can kinda understand why some of his, especially the comedic writing, as you said, kinda trembles in a sense in his newer work. Is that maybe in the past he was very, very, very interested in expressing himself in the sense of his specific person, his specific character in his works, while now he's talking, is telling us about young kids from the perspective of an
Of an adult.
of a boomer, in a sense. He's talking about stuff he wants to tell, but he doesn't really know firsthand. And to me, that's something that I quite find difficult to deal with if I were a creator in this specific sense. Like, for example, in Tenkinoko, there are definitely a lot of moments that to me are very, very interesting when you can see some pressures and problems of the younger generation when it comes, for example, to financial situations that are most of the time pretty troubled in a sense. You can see poverty, but you can also see the fact that you don't know what will happen the day after.
Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah.
To me, while this is something very interesting, the fact that he is talking about these kind of things, that they aren't really that many anime authors that work on this specific kind of subject, he's talking about them from a perspective that's totally uh, that's totally different
Foreign. Yeah. Hmm.
specific kind of issue.
Like I think that's a good point, because I think that the fact that we use the word auteur so much when we talk about him is like it allows us to sort of view him as a very almost Western anime director.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though your name at least touched on very Japanese subjects.
Yeah, but I guess it's also why it appeals to the West. It's this kind of Orientalism and Japanism you find in people. Even if it's not aware, if they're not aware of it, you definitely have this kind of Japanism from Western audiences who are, yeah, they will see it something different and it appeals to them very much.
Yeah.
So anyway, enough talked about Shenkai. Let's hear about Yamano Musume from Fede.
Why I chose Yamano Susume? There are two different reasons. The first is that it sums quite well what I like about Nichijou Kei and Yashikei type of shows, because you have very, very genuine emotions about the characters, and their growth is not really that. It's not really that incoherent. It's pretty much the kind of growth you can have in real life, in a sense that they knew different characters and they start to do different things, and little by little they kind of change, and that's something that in anime it's quite peculiar to that genre to me, because when it comes to other type of narration, you have a specific point A where when the characters have specific type of behavior, and then you end the show with them pretty much well and growth, like they were totally ready for their adult lives, and that's something you can't really see in Nichijou Kei shows. And you can argue that the same thing for a lot of different shows. For example, for Keion, for Lucky Star, for even for stuff like Aria, for example. You have a progression that's really fragmented, and that's quite what I like about them. Also, I am pretty much a Japanese studies nerd, and Yamano Susume quite well express a lot of the things I like about physical geography in Japan, especially when it comes to the connection there is between urban areas and more greener areas. The base of the show, where most of the characters live, is the small city of Ano in Saitama Prefecture, which is a very small town, but also a rich town, and also quite the nature spot in a sense. And all those kind of elements in modern anime, they are represented quite well, especially because there is this kind of interesting phenomenon of people starting doing anime tourism, Butaimbo in Japanese. But in Yamano Susume, this kind of representation is more emotional, and the various Enshutsuka, the various episode directors, they kinda have their favorite spot in Ano City, and they quite portray them in different ways, and that's something that I quite like, especially about episode 10 of the third season, which is probably one of my favorite anime episodes of all time. And I quite I personally find like uh, all the small characteristics that this anime portrays pretty much my thing in a more on a more personal level. And the second reason is essentially that I started enjoying a lot of animators that right now are pretty much my favorite subject of studies, like for example China, like for example Ken Yamamoto, Moang, and also people that maybe they kind of have their Danatsu memoria, and we won't talk about them today. But people that know the stuff of the second season know what I'm talking about specifically, and a lot of other animators that kind of make me say, though, even if today's anime maybe they kind of have their bit of boring parts in how they represent reality, there is still some hope in a sense. And when it comes to China, Moang, and Yamamoto specifically, I think those three are really, really rising stars in a sense. Plus, I really also enjoy all the Idol Master School style of animation, and the character designer Yuzuke Matsuo is quite the bigger one of the two or three bigger stars of that specific way of doing animation.
Do you think that this is another show that came out slightly too early? Because I'm just thinking the phenomenon Eurocamp has been about.
Personally, I don't think so, because it's presumed lack of popularity is something that is not that surprising for a show that's 3 minutes long for the first season, that's half a regular episode for the second and the third, and that's overall a very small series with no real interest for a bigger narrative or even for specific moeko tropes. In a sense, you can say that it's a bishoujo anime series, but for example, the way the characters are portrayed is quite more peculiar and to me unique. If I have to compare it, for example, for Eurocamp. Eurocamp is very, very good to me. And even if it is a series that I personally don't want to think much about him on a more technical level, I think that's quite nice. But it kind of work on tropes and ways of portraying bishoujo characters that are
Sure.
pretty much mainstream. While Yama, to me, is quite different in this sense. Yeah, it's a series that encompasses pretty much all the characteristic, at least from a visual perspective of the bishoujo. But for example, there are characters in Yamosume who have very, very negative emotions, for example. And at some point, one of the protagonists kinda start to hate the other one for a bit of like 2 or 3 episodes, and that kind of raw feeling, the kind of raw sentiment, is something to me quite characteristic of the series per se. It's not something you can see everyone in every other Nichijou-kei series. Like for example, to me, even if Keion is a bit of a masterpiece in this sense, every character relationship in Keion is pretty much static. At some point, the characters are the same, and the series ends with no change essentially. But when it comes to Yamano Susume, character relationships, for example, change constantly, and the animators have their peculiar ways to represent them, and that's something I quite like.
Yeah, that's interesting because I often think that the people who watches these shows are really into it for the fact that it's such a static genre in general, and pushing that.
I guess it's not necessarily the fact of every Nichijoukai series. Like, there are a lot of them where you have actual growth in the characters, and I'd say even K-On! At the end of the movie, the characters they still have changed. Their relation. It's not that the relationship are constantly changing, but their bonding has become stronger, and also because you've invested so much time spending with you've spent so much time with them, you also feel personally attached to them. But I guess the dynamics also, I sadly haven't watched Yamano Susume, so I can't say a lot about it, but I love Fede, hearing Fede talking about it. It's he's got so much passion for it while talking about it. But I guess just the dynamic and the relationships are different than in other shows of this kind.
To me, in K-On!, the growth is coherent and cohesive in a sense, while in Yamano Susume is quite the opposite. It's quite inconsistent and pretty personal between the single characters. In this sense, to me, they are different. But maybe, and that's something I can definitely give the merit to K-On!, is the fact that maybe you can see a little bit better the relationship between the characters just by looking at their motions when they are communicating or they're interacting with each other. While Yam is something you can see maybe in some segments, in some specific episodes, but because of course the production values are totally different, even if Yamano Susume is definitely a Sakuga series in my opinion.
Okay, so I think Ian's next pick is a pretty good fit because it's Aya and it's also
Oh yeah.
a similar show, I think. So what's your thoughts about it?
That's a pretty good transition, yes.
Like, I don't even know where to start because it's just such a good show. I mean, if people listening to this have never heard of Aria, it's very much a slice of life show, with the premise being that they are apprentices gone Mars, and I think it's just one of the most optimistic shows I've seen in a while. And I think that's putting it. It tends to it takes everything very slow. Nothing is rushed in Aria. Like, I'm just imagining if Aria were a sports show, and then they would be competing. There'd be a gondoliering championships, and then at the end of the 26 episodes, they'd be at the Inter High or whatever. And like, that's not how this show goes. It takes place over multiple years, well, Martian years, like a year and a half Earth time. And in the meantime, they just go from being apprentice gondoliers to full gondoliers. It really benefits from the music in this show. I think that's one thing that they get really right. Is it's never intrusive, but it always just fits in just perfectly. I mean, I guess I'm going back on what I said when I was talking about Yamano Susume about character growth. Is that this is the thing, right? That in these terms of there is character growth in little drips and drabs, rather than through a sudden hair-cutting realization. It's also like a very good comic series, I find, in the comedy sense, not the manga sense. Like Junichi Sato really likes his exaggerated faces, as does Kozuya Amano, and it's just got this nice touch of the supernatural where they just sort of bring in the cats to do something stupid for an episode. When we talked about Yokohama Kaidashi on our podcast, I described it as a show you experience rather than watch. And I think this is true of these kind of quote unquote mono no awari shows in general.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point of Iyashike as a genre, like something that you just in a way let come to you, and you get invested in the atmosphere and everything rather than actively watch it or consume it like so many otaku shows.
I would specifically say that so my friend Denny is watching this right now, and I explicitly told him you're not allowed to watch more than a couple of episodes a day.
Yeah.
Like if you binge it, we are no longer friends. And like it was the same thing in YKK, right? It's the sense of time passing and appreciating what is happening in your day-to-day life is like an important theme of the show. And so I think that to watch it too quickly is to miss the point.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference between Nichijoukai and Yashike in a sense. Because even if both of them are about the Nichijou, they are both about the everyday life, they're still pretty different in the how they want to uh, express their own atmosphere. In the sense that, to me, a Nichijoukai show can totally be even over the top comedy to the beginning of the end, but you can't really create that sense of yashiki, of healing with going really fast or focusing too much about the technicalities of that specific scene. You have to kind of create a good collaboration between all the different aspects of the animation department. You have to do coherent backgrounds with the layer. You have to use music in a proper way. It's something that to me kind of defines the genre and how it kind of differs between the more modern Nichijoukai.
Like I think you're right. I would say that like particularly when you're composing the scenes and doing your editing is that you never want there to be like a jump.
Yeah.
So it's got to all come very naturally. Of course, Yashike sort of overlaps heavily with this porn genre of like these shows that we often just we can just kind of like zone out and just be like, ooh, look how pretty this background is. Like, man, this is a really good tree. With Arya in particular, the water is very important. I'm very particular about water, and I didn't realize that until very recently.
You said you're not a real Sakuga fan because you're not experienced, but if you're able to be amazed like that at just the look of a single tree, you're ready for Sakuga. I mean,
Well, well, I would. Well, I mean, I think the phrase I use is like while I've got a lot of experience watching anime, I would say I'm a baby Sakuga fan. In that, for me, I mean, I guess we all feel this to a certain extent because of how, like Mateo talked about this earlier, is that I'm not really interested in flashy animation for its own sake. And generally speaking, I just kind of zone out during fight animation. It's about how it furthers the ideas of the work as a whole. And I think that for me, this kind of Iyashike genre is one of the ones where that became really crystallized for me. Is that you couldn't get Michael Bay to do to do an Iyashike, right? Like he just doesn't have it in him. It takes a certain kind of touch, and it's not that that one way is good and the other way is bad, but like I think that I'm really glad that Junichi Sato was involved in this because I think he really had the touch for it.
Yeah, but that's really interesting from the point of view of animation, because when you think good animation, you think something really fluid or really flashy. But in many Iyashike or even slice of life in general, the animation doesn't have to be flashy to be good.
Precisely.
And that's interesting, I think, because you tend to focus on other things like little character movements or even still shots that can still be good and beautiful without being flashy.
Yeah, to me, it's more a linguistical problem than anything else. Because when we talk about what is good animation, we usually talk about what's in the cell layer, what's in the Genga, in a sense, what is drawn in the scene.
Yeah.
When we talk about what's good animation on a more broad and general term, but we don't talk too much about what's happening specifically in the cell layer. We're talking about the whole picture, the whole animated image.
Yeah, and that's something I touched on with the idea of the distinction between good animation and something that looks good as animation. Something
Yeah.
that looks good as animation is like the whole image, all the drawings, not just the cells, but the backgrounds and everything. And yeah, it's a really good way to put it.
I don't want to add too much on the subject because I guess I'll keep those I'll keep those ideas more for the episode where we'll talk about the discourse around Sakuga. But I think, yeah, the problem is that if you focus too much on animation, you forget that you forget all the aspect of limited animation that there is in anime. You forget all the stills. And for example, Gingai Densetsu, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, it's a show which mostly has not very flashy scenes. The animation itself is actually sometimes quite bad, and it doesn't have very much scenes that stand out. But you have so many still scenes, just with such beautiful backgrounds. They could be paintings. You could frame them and put them in your living room. And I think when talking about animation Sakuga, it's something that often gets forgotten.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing to me is the fact that 90% of them are essentially just a start. There isn't really that differentiation between the various, for example, the various planets or the various locations in general. But with the composition itself, they can do a lot of very interesting and somewhat poetic scenes, especially when the music comes around, because the music works especially well with that specific kind of aesthetic the series want to portray.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, so should we move on to the next pick? Well, let's have Matteo talk about Karekano first. I think it's better.
Yeah, I wondered about whether or not I would talk about it before or after you talk about Evangelion. But anyhow, I want to talk about Karekano in relationship to Evangelion because to me, both shows have very much the same place in my heart. But I knew that you would talk about Evangelion, so for a little bit of variety, I thought I would talk about Karekano.
To have a bit of variety, let's talk about another show by the same director and the same team.
Yeah, but you know, it's both very different and very similar.
Totally agree. Yeah,
that's what I love about it because I think Eva is really much more ambitious. It tackles on so many things at once, like so it has the common themes with Karekano, like identity, psychology, depression. But Eva does so much more. It touches on big robots, otaku, sexuality, psychoanalysis. But what Karekano does it with so much depth and subtlety and and sensibility that even though it does less in its themes, in its writing than Evangelion, I think it's just as good. And that's just talking about the writing, because visually, I think Karekano is just one of the most amazing things ever made, even compared to Evangelion, because it tries so many things. Like the Imaishi episodes are totally experimental with paper cut animation when they burn cells on screen, and even Anno's direction on his episodes explores so much things, like with the stillness, with the silence, with the voiceovers and everything. It's just so complex and so rich that it's just amazing. And once again, I think it's not as rich as Evangelion. So that's telling how good I think Evangelion is in comparison to Karekano, which is already amazing in so many ways.
Yeah, compared to Eva, in Karekano you can see more clearly the subsequent generation of animators that in Evangelion maybe you can see a little in the animation positions, but in Karekano they already have what they wanted to tell in a sense. They are more mature and capable of doing stuff their own, and that's something that to me differentiated the series a lot to compared to Evangelion.
Yeah, and that's something I realized pretty recently about Karekano. But yeah, it's the fact that it's a pretty unique show in Gainax history in a way, because as you said, the moment where these new people, like mostly Imaishi, Yoshinari, and Sushio, and all that team, were starting to get their own their first really creative opportunities. But at the same time, it's very much a Nano show, and it's the first time I know that Anno didn't do an original series anime, like he adapted manga. So even in Anno's work, it's something pretty unique, and it's only also the only work in Anno's career, and even in general Gainax, that isn't a series for otaku. Like there's nothing like Evangelion's homages to mecha, for example, in Karekano. It's pure it's straightforward shoujo in that sense, and it's pretty unique and it's pretty cool.
Even if you can argue that, for example, Nadia isn't a series for otaku, it still has its big moment of otaku pandering. And
even just in Nadia's design, actually.
And even if we talk about, for example, adaptations, the only other adaptation he really did, if we don't count, for example, Shin Gojira as some kind of adaptation of Gojira, the only other thing he did as an adaptation was the Cutie Honey movie. But when it comes to other than Karekano, he never did anything like that.
Yeah, and the Cutie Honey, the series more than the movie is complete otakuness. Like I mean, it's Anno going wild and going and it's a happy Anno who like the Anno from Gunbuster, like who just has fun doing otaku things.
Yeah, as it's a completely unique space in a sense.
Yeah, and Karekano is really different from that, even though it's also an adaptation. It's like it's like a UFO in Anno's and Gainax's career, I think.
So I guess it's a good time to transition to talking about Evangelion. So Evangelion was both my pick and Fede's one. I guess it's no surprise, as the name of this podcast itself is a reference to Evangelion. As you will notice, this anime talking field can stand for AT field. And on my side, Eva is just the anime which made me realize so much about myself and also about how I appreciated art. Just like many other people, I guess most people who today, at this day, still love Eva after all these years and are so passionate about Eva, they will tell you Eva has changed something in me. It has shown me another side of anime, but not for me. It wasn't just anime; it was every video production, my way of looking at movies and everything which is on screen changed when I watched Evangelion, and it just stuck with my love for Evangelion is so huge. I could talk for days about Eva and all its implications, and it's so important in today's collective media sphere, be it just the anime sphere, but even greater than that. And I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty happy that as time goes on, people talk more and more about Eva, and that it's got this huge recognition, even though it's kind of peculiar because Eva in itself is a very intimistic story, which, in a sense, I consider should never had this big of a success. It's so intimistic; it should have been watched by like 10 people or so. But at the same time, it's to me the greatest anime that was ever made. And when I include Eva, I not just include the TV series, but all the movies also, because I didn't want to repeat myself by then citing End of Evangelion as one of my favorite anime movies. Because for me, Eva as a whole, it goes all together. And yeah, I don't want to blather too much about Eva. I'll let Fede say a few words about Eva too, because I could just go on.
I pretty much the same about it. When I watched it for the first time, I was like 14 years old, and at the time I was a big avid manga reader, and I probably read in a year even more than 200 mangas or something like that. And even if I was already starting getting interested in animation, I always thought that animation as something that has more a commercial value than an artistic value. Maybe because I was very young, or maybe because
It has some truth to it. It has some truth to it.
The real good stuff. But when I watched Evangelion, my idea of what animation was started to tremble a bit, and after that I started watching and watching and watching more and more kind of anime that I wasn't really sure how to define them. For example, at the time I was very big into what the definition that Miyazaki used for his movies. He said that they weren't really anime per se; they were more film manga, because they were serious. They weren't stupid in a sense. And at that period of time, I started to think that that kind of definition was definitely wrong, because even very commercial television product have within themselves the possibility of doing something really interesting, even with not necessarily big stuff like important pieces of animation or really complex storyboarding ideas. For example, at the time I watched also stuff like Lane, like Texnolides, all series that they're pretty poor in a sense. Not like Eva is poor, of course, but all the clones that Eva brought on the market in the later years were pretty much small series from a production value perspective. And I started to mature more as a watcher of really media in general, when I started to think that you can really do great things even with just good ideas and just the enough technical abilities to make your idea a reality, and nothing really much more.
The point you brought out about anime being more of a commercial product, it's very interesting, because I guess we'll make a future episode about this topic, because there's a lot to say. But one could argue that with the birth of Toei, or at least like for animation in Japan produced after 45, it's not art anymore. Art in animation does not exist anymore, and it's just commercial. It's just a matter of being a commercial product, and the challenge is to create art, to spawn art out of this a capitalistic mess. Basically, it's you're making a consumption product, and you will try to inject art in it. So, in a sense, what you say has some truth to it. Where manga is not necessarily, but it has its ways to be much more free than animation, especially today. Today, the animation industry is a mess. It's a mess where it's very hard actually to have some very artistic pieces, and that's why I think also all the Sakuga discourse now centers mostly about the craft, is because today it's hard to find the art in the craft. And when Evangelion came out, it actually made there was this crazy boom where producers were like, well, if Evangelion worked, then we'll be ready to write a check for nearly any project. And that's how we got Lane and Boogie Bop and all these other weird series that probably would not have come out in the early 90s or in the late, or which wouldn't come out today. Even though today the market is so large that nearly everything finds its way, even though it's really harder to have original animes produced. You can you still see some shining lights, like there was Hisune Tomasutan, Concrete Evolution, which are original projects which were really well done. But at this time, Evangelion was basically it was a bomb on the industry and also on the artistic side, just like Gundam was also in its time.
I mean, I guess Gundam's an interesting case here because it's both the capitalistic mess and also a work of art.
Yeah, but exactly. But that's why I'm saying that this is something that's present right after 45. So as soon as basically animation starts to be an industry, so a bit later after 45. So with the creation of Toei, but between 45 and Toei, you have the creation of several animation studios which basically failed, and the same teams then created some new studios until Toei finally took off. And you have the first big animation studios like Toei and Telecom, which are created, and then Mushi. But the thing is, at this point, anime becomes commercial. Well, actually, doesn't get commercial right away, because the first Toei movies, they still don't have this much focus on the industry side, on the commercial side, and actually, really, when Mushi production starts and that the TV animation series start, that it's becoming an industry and that it becomes a product, and even more so than with Yamato, which really starts all the franchising, licensing, and all the merchandising around the series. So basically between 45 and then the beginning of the 70s is when you watch the Halls, also, like the feeling you have, which then with the start of TV series is very different, and even more so if you look at pre-Second World War Japanese animation.
I think the intimidated when people talk about Evangelion, because it's one of those things where it's hard to say anything that people haven't already said 100 times. It like I kind of think of it though as the thing that surprises me though is that people do keep finding things in it. It's really been a gift that has kept on giving. Like there's new videos out on Evangelion like every month or so on YouTube, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah, but there's so much to say about it, because also, especially here in the West, there's so much that has yet to be discovered about it. Because basically, the thing is, for many years, first of all, you have had people saying just wrong things about Evangelion, or making assumption, and now that resources are being translated and are coming to us, or that just people finally read them, because some of them, the resources, they were available for 10 years, even more, and just people never read them, and they preferred to watch some YouTube videos of uninformed people. And the fact is, so people get more informed about it, and new resources are found, but also just in all the influences which are distilled into Eva, because basically Eva, Anno, he put all of his mind, all of what he likes into Eva, and it's at the same time it's a very unique and personal work of art. But also it's so referential. You have so many homages and references to so many things that you could. I don't think that one single human could possibly have all those references. And also by talking about Eva with other fans and from various places, you learn about new inspirations of Eva. Like while I was in Japan, I met a film director and tokusatsu director who directed various kind of tokusatsu-like movies. He one of them did the designs for Ultraman Tiger, and they were telling me about how in the Evangelion Avant, for the 10 first minutes of Shin Evangelion, when the boats like protect the Eva, it's a reference to I don't remember now the tokusatsu series it was, but it's a reference to the tokusatsu series, and it's that all along. And so anytime you have a very compelling shot in Eva, you'll ask yourself, is that original or does that call back to something? And I mean, there's so much to learn about Eva, even on the production side and the people involved in it. And also about the story itself. Like it's such a meta work, because it isn't limited to talk. Like if you get interested in Eva, you won't just get interested in the universe of Eva, so what's in the work, but also every aspect outside the work. And I guess it's also work that often will lead people to become sakuga otaku or otakus, because you get so involved in knowing more about this work, and so also knowing more about how anime is produced in the anime industry, etc., that you'll end up actually becoming otaku. That's why people say it's ironic how people watch Evangelion become full-fledged otaku, but it's because it's such a mystery. Like by itself, it includes so much. And when you get obsessed with it because of how much you like it, or just you want to understand it even, then you need to dig so deep and invest so much time that it becomes part of yourself.
Yeah, as Dimi said, I think one of the reasons why we can still find things to say about Eva is that it's very easy to be wrong about Eva.
Also, yeah.
And the fact that it sets up so many things, like there's so many references and so many obscure symbolism, and you don't know if it's a serious reference, a not serious one, or if it's just thrown around for whatever reason. That it sets up so many false leads about so many things that you can talk about it endlessly for hours and just totally miss the point. And that's really fascinating about it. And in a way, I think that's almost intentional, because there's so many things that you can get wrong. I'm sure that there's some level of intentionality to it, in the way that it's a very otaku work with a ton of references and everything.
Yeah, I think there's only two things I sort of want to say. One is that it's important that you mentioned this is what makes people become otaku, because I think for a long time I probably almost maybe a little snobbishly would have said you're not a real anime fan unless you've watched Evangelion. I don't know that I necessarily need people to like it or understand it, but I was like, if you haven't watched it, I was like almost like, well, you're not a real fan.
I mean, can one say, oh, you're a real fan of anime, or you aren't? But indeed, the thing is, often when people say, oh, I'm an anime fan, how do you define being an anime fan? Is it just watching anime? And to me, if you just watch anime, is it really enough to say yourself an anime fan? Because to me today, being an anime fan is being a fan of the medium. It's not just liking to watch anime, it's also liking all there is around anime and anime otaku culture. So in a sense, I can get that you could say, if you haven't watched Evangelion, you're not a real anime fan, because you haven't had, basically, like I was saying, this introduction to wanting to know more about the context of this work you created. Because most of the time, people watch anime, they consume anime, they've watched the show, they've liked it, they probably have a lot of things to say about the show, like about the work, the inside world of the work, but they aren't aware of what everything around the work is. Like prime example is Code Geass. Many people who are anime fans, they've watched Code Geass, they love Code Geass and such. but they actually don't know anything about the production of Code Geass, which is actually quite interesting because the production of Code Geass explains a lot about why the show is how it is. So yeah, I guess, and with Eva, you can't turn around that. You can't avoid it because you're so compelled about the ending of the show. You want to understand why End of Eva was done like this, and so you can't watch Eva. I mean, you can, and I guess that most people who say they didn't like Eva or they didn't really care about it, they're the people who just watched the work for itself and didn't try to understand the context and everything. And so if you haven't watched Eva, you're not sensitive to watching all the things that are around the work. You're not compelled to look at who worked on it, how the work ended up how it is and such.
Yeah. So the second thing I was going to say is I think when you're saying that there's a lot of ways to be wrong about Eva, I think we've all had one or two Eva takes that we've maybe kind of regret. I think for the longest time I would often half trollingly say that Eva ruined mecha. And
We all agreed at some point.
And what I meant by that was that because it was so influential, I felt that every person who was making a mecha show wanted to write a Shinji, but didn't understand what Shinji was. And so we ended up with a really bad protagonist that was just kind of like a whiny self-insert. And I don't really think that's true of Evangelion. Of course, Gundam has to be accepted here because Gundam has its own thing, but non-Gundam mecha shows I felt were kind of ruined by Eva for a while. So there's my bad take.
I mean, if we talk about late night shows, I definitely agree on that. Because of course you have stuff like Gundam, you have stuff like the Yusha series, which are targeted on a total different demographic. But when it comes to mecha that pretends to be deep, pretends to be something important,
Shall I name one?
it's pretty much it's pretty much something that today, if they exist in a very, very small niche and with very poor results, with some exceptions. For example, to me, Raxephon is still a very, very good Eva clone.
Okay, are we done on Evangelion?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, we're never done on Evangelion, so let's say we're done on Evangelion.
Yeah, so just wait till we have a separate podcast where we just talk about Evangelion and it'll have 1,000.
Oh, but someday we'll do it. We'll definitely do an episode just about Eva, because, like I said, there's so much to say about Eva. Like at some point in time, I was thinking about doing a video series just about Eva, and like each video would tackle one aspect of Eva, like one about the music, one about the directing, one about the animation, one episode each, and you could do like 50 episodes like that, like a whole documentary series.
Actually, I have a second Eva hot take for you.
Yeah, go on.
So the Eva version of Cruel Angel's Thesis is not the best version. The best version is sung by Hinagiku in the second season of Hayate no Gotoku.
Yeah, I agree on that.
You know what? I won't even disagree with that. This concludes our picks for favorite anime TV series. Who would have guessed that it would take us this long? I guess we will talk about the movies in the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of the 80 Shield. Feel free to share your opinions in the comments, and if you don't want to miss another episode, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. You can also read our various articles and interviews on fullfrontal.moe. この月もサービス